Harlan could tolerate a lot. He tolerated the violation for his deck, the one he built himself 30 years ago. He tolerated the citation for his mailbox, which had been the same color since the Clinton administration. He even tolerated the fine for his American flag bracket being non-regulation size. But when the notice came for Nettie's garden, something shifted. His wife had planted that garden the spring before she got sick. She made him promise to keep it exactly as it was. 3 years after her funeral, the new HOA president, a man half his age, was calling it overgrown vegetation and demanding its removal. That was the day Harlan stopped paying fines and started paying attention. And what he found went far beyond one man's power trip. Harlan stood in the garden at 6 in the morning, coffee in hand, violation notice in the other. The paper said, overgrown vegetation and non-compliant landscaping. It gave him 30 days to remove or modify the plantings. 3 years he'd kept this garden exactly the way Nettie left it. Now some piece of paper was telling him to tear it out. He looked at the roses along the fence. Nettie had planted those the spring before she got sick. She'd spent a whole Saturday on her knees in the dirt, arranging them just right. He remembered standing on the porch, asking if she needed help. She waved him off, said she had a vision and he'd only get in the way. That was Nettie. She always had a vision. By fall, she was in the hospital. By winter, she was gone. But every spring since, those roses came back. Same colors, same pattern. Her hands had been in that soil, and something of her was still here because of it. Harlan folded the notice and put it in his shirt pocket. He wasn't going to argue with the piece of paper. He was going to talk to whoever sent it. The HOA office was a small room in the community clubhouse. The new president had been elected 6 months ago. Harlan had missed that meeting. Now he wished he hadn't. Cody Simmons was behind the desk when Harlan walked in. 42 years old, polo shirt, expensive watch. He was typing on a laptop and didn't look up right away. Harlan waited. He was good at waiting. When Cody finally raised his eyes, he smiled like Harlan was a salesman he was about to turn away. Harlan placed the notice on the desk. He explained that his wife had planted that garden. He explained that she passed 3 years ago. He explained that he had promised her it would stay exactly as she left it. Cody nodded along like he was listening. Then he said the violation was valid. He said the community had standards. He said Harlan could file an appeal, but the board would review it, and the board supported the current enforcement approach. Harlan asked who decided the garden was a problem after 32 years of no complaints. Cody leaned back in his chair. He said the neighborhood was evolving. He said what worked in 1992 didn't necessarily work today. He said rules applied to everyone, and he was just doing his job. Harlan noticed a folder on Cody's desk. The tab said, Ridgeline Properties. He didn't think much of it at the time. Harlan looked at Cody for a long moment. This man had lived in the neighborhood for 2 years. He'd been president for 6 months. And he was sitting there explaining how things worked to someone who'd been here before he was born. Harlan didn't argue. He'd learned a long time ago that arguing with certain people only fed them. He thanked Cody for his time and walked out. But something had shifted. The violation for the deck he'd tolerated, the citation for the mailbox he'd paid, the fine for the flag bracket he'd let slide. This was different. This was Nettie's garden. And the way Cody talked, the way he smiled, the phrase, the neighborhood was evolving. This wasn't about landscaping. Someone wanted him gone. Harlan didn't know why yet, but he intended to find out. Harlan started paying attention. He walked the neighborhood in the mornings, something he hadn't done much since Nettie passed. He waved to the people he knew, which was most of them, and he asked a simple question. Had they gotten any violation notices lately? The answers told him everything. Dolores Finch, on Maple Lane, 74 years old, 28 years in her home. Violation for a garden hose left visible on the side of her house. Leroy and Bettina Marshall on Oak Court, both 71, 30 years in the neighborhood. Violation for their garage door paint being faded and inconsistent with community standards. Wendell Pace had been on Cedar Drive since 1989. His violation? A window air conditioning unit, the same unit in the same window for 15 years. No one had said a word until now. Every long-time resident Harlan talked to had a story. Some had 2 or 3. The fines were adding up. A few were already talking about whether it was worth staying. Then Harlan talked to the newer residents, the ones who'd moved in the last 5 years. Not a single violation, not one. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew it meant something. The answer came on a Saturday morning. Harlan was on his porch with his coffee when a young couple walked up the driveway, late 20s, maybe early 30s. The woman was carrying a folder. They looked nervous. The man introduced them. His name was Tyler. His wife was Jenna. They had just bought a house on Birch Street, 3 streets over. They wanted to ask Harlan something. Jenna opened the folder. She said when they bought the house, the real estate agent told them the neighborhood was transitioning. He said most of the longtime residents were eager to sell. He said the area was being revitalized and property values were about to climb. She said they felt misled. The neighborhood didn't look like it was transitioning. It looked like a normal community with people who'd lived there for decades. Harlan asked who the real estate agent was. Jenna showed him the paperwork. The agent's name was Dale Buckner. Harlan didn't recognize it, but he noticed the agency name, Simmons Buckner Realty. He asked if Buckner was related to the HOA president. Tyler nodded. He said they looked it up after they moved in. Dale Buckner was Cody Simmons's brother-in-law. Harlan sat with that for a minute. The violations, the longtime residents being targeted, the sales pitch about transitioning, the HOA president's brother-in-law selling homes. He thanked Tyler and Jenna. He said they did the right thing coming to him. Then he got in his truck and drove to the county records office. Harlan had spent 41 years as an electrician. He knew how to pull permits, trace paperwork, and follow a trail. County property records were public. He requested transfers in Maplewood Estates for the past 2 years. 6 homes had sold in the last 18 months, all to buyers he'd never seen in the neighborhood. He wrote down the buyer names. 3 different companies. None of them sounded like real people. He went to the state business registry, looked up all 3 companies. Each one traced back to the same parent corporation, Ridgeline Development Partners. He searched Ridgeline's filings, and there it was, listed as a managing partner, Cody Simmons. Harlan sat in his truck in the parking lot for a long time. He read the filing twice to make sure he hadn't misunderstood. He hadn't. This wasn't a power trip. This wasn't one man on an ego kick. This was a plan. Buy enough homes through shell companies. Push out the long-time residents with harassment. Flip the whole neighborhood. And Harlan, with his 32 years and his wife's garden, was standing in the way. Harlan made a list. Every long-time resident who'd mentioned violations. Every neighbor he'd known for decades who suddenly seemed tired or frustrated. 12 names. 12 doors to knock on. He started the next morning. Dolores Finch answered on the second knock. She looked surprised to see him. Harlan explained what he'd found. The shell companies. Cody's development firm. The pattern of targeting. Dolores listened without interrupting. When he finished, she invited him inside and pulled out a shoebox from her hall closet. Inside were 14 violation notices. 14 in 5 months. She said she'd been too embarrassed to tell anyone how many she'd gotten. She thought maybe she really was letting her property go. Harlan looked through them. A garden hose, a trash can visible from the street for 2 hours, a holiday wreath left up 3 days past the HOA deadline. None of it was real. All of it was harassment. Dolores said she was in. Whatever Harlan was planning, she wanted to help. Leroy Marshall was angrier. He met Harlan on his front porch and didn't invite him inside, but he listened. When Harlan finished, Leroy said he'd suspected something was wrong. He said a man came to his door 2 months ago offering to buy the house. No sign in the yard, no listing. The man just showed up with a number. Leroy told him no. The violation started 2 weeks later. Leroy said he and Bettina had been talking about selling anyway. Not because they wanted to, because they were tired. But if someone was trying to push them out, that changed things. He said, count them in. Not everyone was ready. Wendell Pace shook his head and said he didn't have the energy for a fight. Harlan didn't push, he just asked Wendell to think about it. By the end of the 3rd day, Harlan had knocked on 12 doors. 4 people said no. 1 woman was already packing. She'd accepted an offer the week before and didn't want to talk about it. But 8 said yes. 8 homeowners with a combined 212 years in the neighborhood. Dolores, Leroy, and Bettina. A retired teacher named Opal Hutchins. 5 others, each with their own stack of violation notices. They met at Harlan's kitchen table on a Thursday evening. Harlan laid out everything he'd found. The shell companies, the business filings, the connection to Cody, the pattern of who got violations and who didn't. Opal asked what they could actually do about it. She said Cody controlled the board. The votes were rigged in his favor. Harlan said they needed an attorney, someone who specialized in HOA abuse, someone who knew the laws Cody might have broken. Leroy asked how they'd pay for that. Harlan said they'd split the cost, 8 households. Whatever the retainer was, they'd divide it equally. If they couldn't afford to fight, they definitely couldn't afford to lose their homes. The room went quiet. Then Dolores reached into her purse and put $300 on the table. She said it was her portion in advance. One by one, the others nodded. Opal said she'd type up a summary of every violation each of them had received. Bettina said she'd pulled together before and after photos of the supposed problems. Leroy said he had a nephew who was a paralegal. He'd ask for attorney recommendations. Harlan looked around the table. A week ago, each of them had felt alone, targeted, worn down. Now they were organized. This wasn't just about his house anymore. It wasn't just about Nettie's garden. This was about the whole neighborhood. The question was whether anyone would listen to 8 seniors fighting a developer. Leroy's nephew came through. He recommended an attorney named Francine Delacroix. She worked out of a small office downtown and specialized in homeowner disputes. Her reviews said she was aggressive, thorough, and didn't back down from developers. Harlan called her on a Monday morning. He explained the situation in 3 minutes. Shell companies, targeted violations, the HOA president's secret partnership. Francine listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked one question. Did he have documentation? Harlan said he had copies of everything. County records, business filings, violation notices, photos. Francine said she could meet them Thursday. The group gathered at her office that afternoon. 8 homeowners crowded into a conference room meant for 6. Francine spent an hour reviewing the materials. She asked sharp questions. She took notes. She didn't make any promises. Then she leaned back in her chair and said they had more than they realized. She explained that state law required board members to disclose financial conflicts, real estate investments, development partnerships. Cody had never filed a disclosure, not once in 6 months. Harlan leaned forward. He asked what that meant. Francine said it meant Cody had broken state law the day he took office. It was grounds for removal from the board. It might even open him up to personal liability for any decisions he made while in non-compliance. Leroy asked if that was enough to stop him. Francine said it was a start, but she wanted to look deeper. The pattern of violations targeting only long-term residents might constitute selective enforcement. If they could prove the violations were designed to pressure specific homeowners into selling, that crossed into harassment. Depending on the demographics, it might even touch fair housing laws. She asked if any of the targeted residents were over 62. All 8 of them raised their hands. Francine nodded slowly. She said age-based targeting of homeowners could trigger federal protections. She wasn't ready to make that claim yet, but it was worth investigating. Opal asked what the next step was. Francine said they had 2 paths. The first was legal. File a complaint with the state attorney general's office. Request an investigation into Cody's failure to disclose and potential self-dealing. That would take months, maybe a year. Bureaucracy moved slow. The second path was faster. Public pressure. Francine said she knew an investigative reporter at the local television station, a woman named Greta Hollins. Greta covered real estate corruption and had taken down 2 developers in the past 3 years. She didn't lose. Harlan asked what going public would actually do. Francine explained that development deals lived and died on investor confidence. The people funding Cody's project didn't care about Maplewood Estates. They cared about returns. If the project became a liability, bad publicity, legal exposure, community backlash, investors would pull out. No investors meant no money. No money meant the deal collapsed. Dolores asked if going public would make things worse for them. More violations, more pressure. Francine said it might, for a little while. But once the cameras showed up, Cody couldn't touch them without making himself look guilty. Retaliation after a news story was the fastest way to confirm everything they were saying. The room went quiet. Harlan looked around the table. These were people who had lived their whole lives avoiding conflict, paying their dues, following the rules. Now, they were being asked to go on television and fight. Leroy spoke first. He said he didn't move to this neighborhood to get pushed out by some developer in a polo shirt. He said he was in. One by one, the others agreed. Dolores, Bettina, Opal, all 8. Francine picked up her phone and sent a text. She said Greta would call her back within the hour. Harlan sat back in his chair. For weeks, he'd felt like he was chasing shadows. Now, they had a weapon. The law, the press, the truth. If they were going to fight, they were going to fight loud. Greta Hollins arrived on a Tuesday with a cameraman and a notebook full of questions. She was in her early 50s, direct and clearly experienced. She told Harlan she'd spent 3 days verifying his documentation before agreeing to come. The shell companies checked out. The business filings checked out. The conflict of interest violation was real. She said this was exactly the kind of story her station loved. Developers versus seniors. Corporate greed versus community roots. If the interviews were strong, it would lead the 6 o'clock news. They started with Harlan. Greta positioned him in front of Nettie's garden. The roses were blooming. The cameraman framed the shot so the flowers filled the background. Greta asked Harlan how long he'd lived in the house. Harlan said 32 years. He said he and his wife Nettie raised 2 children there. He said Nettie planted the garden behind him the spring before she got sick. He said she passed 3 years ago, and he promised her he'd keep it exactly the way she left it. Greta asked about the violation. Harlan held up the notice. He said the new HOA president called it overgrown vegetation. He said 30 days to remove or modify. He said the same president was secretly partners in a development company trying to buy out the whole neighborhood. Greta asked how that made him feel. Harlan paused. He said it made him realize this was never about landscaping. It was about pushing out people like him so someone could make money. He said he wasn't going to let that happen. The other interviews went the same way. Dolores showed her shoebox of 14 violations. Leroy talked about the man who showed up offering to buy his house 2 weeks before the citation started. Opal explained how she'd lived in her home for 31 years and suddenly couldn't do anything right according to the new board. Every story was different. Every story was the same. Long-time residents targeted, newcomers left alone, a pattern too clear to ignore. Greta told Harlan she'd approached Cody for comment. He'd agreed to talk. Harlan wasn't sure if that was good or bad. The story aired on Thursday at 6. The anchor introduced it as an investigation into a developer scheme targeting senior homeowners. The segment ran 8 minutes. Nettie's roses filled the screen. The stack of violation notices on Dolores's kitchen table. The county records with Cody's name highlighted. 8 minutes of evidence he couldn't explain away. They also showed Cody. Greta had approached him outside the community clubhouse. She asked about the shell companies. She asked about his failure to disclose his financial interest. She asked why only long-term residents were receiving violations. Cody smiled the same smile Harlan had seen in the HOA office. He said the violations were standard enforcement. He said the business filings were public record and not relevant. He said some residents had difficulty adapting to community standards. Greta asked if he was targeting seniors to force them out. Cody laughed. He said that was ridiculous and frankly offensive. He said the station should be more careful about spreading baseless accusations from a handful of disgruntled homeowners. Then he added something that would replay on social media for weeks. He said, "These people need to understand that neighborhoods change. You adapt or you move on." The segment ended with Harlan standing in front of the garden. The anchor noted that the state attorney general's office had confirmed receipt of a formal complaint and was reviewing the matter. The response was immediate. The story got shared online. Local Facebook groups picked it up. People who had never heard of Maplewood Estates were commenting about greedy developers and elderly homeowners being pushed from their homes. A state representative posted the segment on social media and called for an investigation. Cody's "adapt or move on" quote became the headline everywhere. By Friday afternoon, Francine called with news. Ridgeline Development Partners had issued an internal memo. 2 of their 3 primary investors had requested an emergency meeting. By Monday morning, both had pulled their funding. The development deal was dead. Harlan heard the news sitting on his front porch. He looked out at the garden. The roses were still blooming. Nettie's roses, still exactly where she planted them. He didn't celebrate. That wasn't his style, but he allowed himself a small nod. The fight wasn't over yet, but they were winning. The state attorney general's office moved faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks, they opened a formal investigation into Cody Simmons for failure to disclose financial conflicts and potential self-dealing. Francine said the news coverage helped. Politicians paid attention when stories went viral. Cody resigned 3 days after the investigation was announced. No statement, no apology, he just stopped showing up. His house went on the market a week later, priced to sell fast. Harlan heard he moved 2 counties over to a rental apartment. He also heard Ridgeline Development Partners was being sued by their own investors. The money people didn't like being embarrassed on television. The same man who told Harlan rules apply to everyone was now learning that consequences did too. The neighborhood held a special meeting in late October. 47 homeowners packed into the community clubhouse. Francine attended as a legal advisor. The agenda had one item: whether to dissolve the HOA entirely. Harlan spoke first. He kept it short. He said the HOA had been used as a weapon against the people it was supposed to protect. He said the violations, the fines, the selective enforcement, all of it was designed to drive them out. He said they had a chance to make sure it never happened again. Dolores spoke next, then Leroy, then Opal. Each of them told their story. 14 violations in 5 months. A mysterious buyer showing up before the citations started. 31 years in a home, and suddenly nothing was good enough. Even Wendell Pace was there, the man who said he didn't have the energy for a fight. He didn't speak, but when the vote came, his hand went up with everyone else's. 47-0. The HOA was dissolved. The neighborhood would return to simple deed restrictions. No board, no president, no one with the power to target anyone ever again. Harlan walked home that night feeling lighter than he had in months. The shell company homes went back on the market over the winter. Without the development deal, the companies had no reason to hold them. One by one, real families bought them. Young couples, retirees looking to downsize. A single mother with 2 kids who said she'd been priced out of 3 other neighborhoods. Harlan introduced himself to each of them. He told them about the neighborhood, the block parties in summer, the way people looked out for each other. He didn't mention the fight. That was behind them now. Tyler and Jenna from Birch Street stopped by one afternoon. They said they were glad they'd knocked on his door that Saturday morning. Harlan told them he was glad too. Spring came early that year. By mid-March, the garden was already waking up, green shoots pushing through the soil, buds forming on the rose bushes along the fence. Harlan stood in the garden on a Saturday morning, coffee in hand. Same spot he'd stood a year ago when the violation notice arrived. Same view, same roses. He talked to Nettie sometimes, not out loud, just in his head. He told her about the fight, about the neighbors who stood with him, about the reporter and the attorney and the vote that ended the HOA for good. He told her the garden was still here, exactly the way she left it. He kept his promise. He thought she would have been proud, not of the fight, she never liked conflict, but of the fact that he didn't back down when it mattered. A moving truck pulled up across the street. New neighbors, a couple in their 30s unloading boxes. The woman saw Harlan watching and waved. He waved back. Harlan looked at the roses one more time. They'd bloom again in a few weeks. Same colors, same pattern. Nettie's hands had been in this soil, and something of her was still here because of it. He finished his coffee and walked to the porch. The new neighbors were struggling with the couch. Harlan set down his mug and headed across the street to help. The neighborhood was his. It always had been, and it was staying that way.